Chapter 64 to 66. Omake 11, FGO number 10. So, you didn't do any high jump practice to end up getting any of them. I could only frown at the curious question I was bestowed with. It was a chilly summer day in Chaldea, and I was trying to fight the heat. Quite a tough task when the Barghest from my home dimension, which had been recently summoned, decided to use her head pat rights to settle her head onto my lap and get herself a few hours of affection through that. I was sweating a storm at that moment, but, luckily enough, my peculiar conversation buddy was providing me with some refreshment in the form of water, cold tea and some light soda beverages. So yeah, it wasn't the worst, but it was far from good. And with this question, my poor heat-weakened brain felt itself stuck in a pseudo-brain fart. What? I mean, there could be other ways but dash. No, like, what? I repeated flatly, trying to reason with this logic. How could you expect me to do any high jumps in medieval Britain? It's just... The sword thrower of an archer paused at my question and sighed. It's just that this is how I landed myself a harem. Well, my old self and now, this manifests with the other demi-servants. Have you considered that maybe the action wasn't what really triggered their attraction? I groaned calmly. Like your name's Shiro, right? Archer or Amiya Dash? I am quite sure Ria called you Shiro. Wait, is this one of those I do not like my name, so I have to rely on something that barely resembles it? Sorta? The admission had me humming. Well, I think it's stupid at this point. Everyone here is going to be stuck with the humanity-saving job for a while. And we are all tagging along for this. It's more complicated than that, Yamaiwai rebuked. Well, the high jump is also complicated in its own way. Which is why I can tell it confuses you as much as it annoys you, I pointed out. These girls you mentioned, your harem is made of girls that, one way or another, have been missing something which that training definitely found strong in you. And that was, I want to do something I am not good at precisely, and despite my lack of skills, I will try on and on until I get it. And you got it, right? I asked back and he nodded. And that's why you gained their respect and hopes. You put yourself onto something which sounded so hopeless and without meaning, and yet you did it because you willed yourself into the matter. Perhaps that's also what you should take as your own advice. His eyes narrowed at this. How? Let me ask you something, Shiro. You definitely look like the kind of guy that tried everything to find closure, but I have a feeling the one thing you didn't do was look back to before you were a hero. Why would it matter? The archer-class servant pressed back. What's the point of involving someone that wasn't a hero yet? The same reason why you are looking to stop behaving like a reluctant one, I remarked quietly, giving a look at Barghest and noticing a tired look on her puppy face. Which is that you gave up on yourself long before you tried to find a solution. I see. I sighed, giving him a look. Also, you need to get laid. Yamaiwai tensed up. What? Shiro, do you want to feel manly? What? Manly, do you want to feel that? I reiterated half annoyedly. Igriga yes? Shiro replied, confused. Then say yes to Ishtar and Parvati, go to your room and show yourself a gentleman in bed. Biba dash, he spluttered nervously, blushing like a little boy that was introduced to the birds and bees, and I groaned. I swear, man, you are in a situation where ignoring the problem will hurt the problem. They are not bound by any reason to not go through with that, and there's nothing but mere nervousness stopping you from going through that duty. It's not a duty dash. Oh right. An honor? A service? A mission of justice dash. Don't call it like that. Then do it and stop whining. I can tell you are pulling the righteous BS to save your hide from that chore. Be a man, be a hero, be their hero as much as they will be yours, I remarked dully. And now go, I really need to get a cold shower going or I will catch a heat stroke. He nodded, but before leaving he asked a question out of curiosity. Since we are servants, we shouldn't be dealing with that sort of issue. We are more resilient to sickness, but we aren't completely warding off if our bodies want to mimic the symptoms out of muscle memory, I replied dryly, and the guy was off to more pondering and maybe some deed-doing. I looked at Barghest again. Are you up for a bath, girl? Bork. Yeah, but no tsunami in the tub or I will leave the cleaning duty to Mordred. And you know how she handles that sort of business if pissed off. To her credit, Barghest whined in remembrance at those big episodes of defiance, rebellions against her owner's kid that ended in tragedy. But at least she accepted this reasoning to not misbehaving during the bath session and was wagging her tail through and through while I helped her clean up. It was a bit awkward as I remembered there was a human-like version of her running around, but at least I didn't get to go through that awkwardness with Melusine. The little drakeling had yet to be summoned, but I have a feeling the possessive flying lizard was going to find her short and adorable fairy version worthy of some whining and maybe some assault to be considered the best Melusine out of this world too. I shook my head at that potential thought and I felt like something was wrong. It came with the feeling I had when some familiar servants were summoned and I could tell it was going to be dreadful. Imagine my surprise when, as I was done bathing, I walked up to my room to find King Morgan, glaring at the similar-looking witch now happily sitting on my bed and smiling as she saw me approach. Greetings, dear Dot. 2 words that meant a lot, but also seemed to be enough to piss off the kingly version of my Morgan a bit more than I would like. And Omake. The return back to Londinium was not worthy of any fanfare. The people were happy, but they had been made aware my trip northward was not anything special like the one I had in Europe. No parade was made, no jubilation was offered, and I managed to enter the city without gaining any shock and surprises by actually holding tight on the newly acquired familiar. I got her close to my chest and away from sight. The little drake had been a surprise. A big one at that. I mean, who wouldn't have been surprised by this discovery without enough notice? I wasn't even sure Morgan had purposely led me to discover it. In fact, from the notes I had looked into during our early search, I would say she didn't even hope the thing would have hatched. Yet it did. A dragon, a mythological creature which theoretically couldn't exist due to her kind was stuck on the other side of the world, or something like that, was there and currently bonding with me. The drake was quite receptive to head pats and hugs, which made things easy for me when it came to tame and keep the thing under check. However, it would be a lie to say she was outright under control while around me. She tried to posture aggressively against Lancelot when I introduced her to it, but calmed down just as I got her body to melt at my chin rubbing and ear scratching. Her horns were pleasure spots too when handled the right way, and she was a purring cutie by the time I had her completely outmatched by wholesome treating alone. She was resting as we got back home, and while Lancelot suggested creating a space for her in the stables to keep her away from causing trouble, I had a better idea. To say that Altuoz was stunned by this unusual discovery was a thing. The man jumped and gave me a renewed stare of admiration for having literally brought a little dragon back home. He gave her a closer look, understanding that what I needed was something which would magically bound her to me. Good news was that the dragon was already somewhat bound to me by what he described as a perceived parental instinct. So yes, the baby drake imprinted on me as I had assumed. Still, this wasn't enough to establish a dominant role in her growth. Hence why a medium, familiar magical bond ritual was quickly performed to prevent any surprises. The point of the bond would be to keep Melusine from seeing any point of disobeying me in any strong demands. And yes, I gave her the name Melusine because I had to give her a name, and I messed up my memory of the other Melusine I knew about, a woman that could turn into either a fish or a snake. Definitely not a dragon. Oh well, it's still a good name. So yeah, this was a new thing to add to the list. Tamed a dragon. Sorta. I still had to go beyond step 1, but I was hopeful it was quite feasible the moment I tried to introduce her to the family. Bargast was, as expected, suspicious of the bundle of scales and chirps. Maya smiled kindly while, surprisingly enough, getting a free pass for head pats by the drake. Lyanna kept back out of genuine uncertainty of this, maybe because her Fey DNA saw Melusine as a bit of a threat and Mordred. Dear, I think we should put a stop at this, I muttered, trying to calm Maya's giggles as the most absurd turn of events just unfolded before our eyes, causing pretty much the entire room to either chuckle/giggle or gawk at the sight of a toddler riding a tiny drake. I wasn't exactly sure if it was some magical situation tied to my bond with Melusine, or Mordred having descended from someone with the core of a red dragon, but the way the little blonde easily crawled up to the happy critter, shifted on her back and then muttered something close to fly, which resulted in her current airborne status, my jaw just dropped. And I spent several seconds questioning how the heck was that even possible despite all potential reasons. Still, once I was done gawking at the sight for a while, I ultimately put an end to it before the girl tilted at the wrong time and fell. Both the dragon and the cute rider looked immensely upset at the lack of a longer flight. The sour mood grew into a more neutral one when I promised them both I would allow them to do it again. But in a room with reinforced windows and with numerous pillows covering the floor, walls and ceiling. Nonetheless, a successful introduction of a new member to the family. Lucy was surprised by the sight but was quite pleased by the development, while Scathach just decided to help with the training by getting Melusine at times and give her head pats while she rested on the woman's lap. And with that situation mostly sorted out in its more pressing matters, it was time to turn my attention back to the reason I had to go to the deepest corner of Scotland. The dagger was there, Morgan was looking giddy at the ensuing steps, and the ritual was fairly intense. Altuoz had requested my assistance as the one doing the most about it since it was supposed to draw a lot of energy he didn't have. I was not exactly happy about it, but Morgan definitely had that vindictive cheeky smile that confirmed a degree of amusement at seeing me stuck with this task. Nonetheless, the ritual happened. I was spared from saying much as I was just turned into a glorified battery for the whole thing as the knife cut into Morgan. Scathach had tried to explain the process to me after listening to Altuoz and giving a closer look to the dagger, but even the Lady of Shadows was perplexed by some aspects of this ritual. Specifically the end results of it, as something about the tool we were going to use didn't make much sense. It held some runes that were unusual, unknown and quite unnecessary. Asking Morgan about it just had her remark they were meant to prevent any leftovers to remain behind, as a full split by normal runes was not achievable. A small portion of the dark side would remain if the old runes were used, hence why she added a few ones to guarantee a full split. And as we all looked into it, I could see the logic in that regard, as one of the 3 unusual runes had the purpose of complete and the other of purity. Making a judgment call, I decided to still go for it, but to keep Scathach in standby for any surprises it was best to intervene externally against. The ritual started, drained me a bit, but ultimately the knife cut into Morgan and her connection to her other selves was ultimately severed as she had explained. A blinding white light bathed us all in the room where this was happening, and what we were bestowed with was surprising. Morgan was there, but she wasn't the same as last time. Her clothes were somewhat the same as her usual ones, but gone was the crown with the veil. And gone were the marks of Uther's blood curse, as her pristine white skin was now devoid of any corruption. Yet, it wasn't the only change in her physical appearance. She looked a little bit shorter and her frame slimmer. And her face younger. The ritual's end goal beyond its main separation process was also one that removed the curse that had tortured Morgan for many years, by deaging her to a point where she had yet to unleash it and thus could be safely removed by the dagger itself. At first glance and by her own admission, Morgan was now 20, which meant she was a year and a half older than Rhea now due to this change. In layman's terms, Morgan was younger, and now purified by any negative taint which had previously given her the chance to develop impressive magical power and attitude as a dark witch and fairy. Which meant she was now weaker than Scathach in magical might despite her more expanded knowledge and understanding over magic itself. Did she mind the fact her power was gone? Not truly. Not when something came up about her current sentence clashed with her new situation. There were some specific details in the bargain that, within my early knowledge of things, seemed foolproof. No? Not anymore. Morgan argued, a bit too happily in that regard, that the Hayes was worded that her duties and punishment were constituted within the reasons that she caused trouble as a dark witch. Something that was no longer applicable due to this development. Hence why I am no longer bound by it. I blinked and nodded. That seems fair. My response stunned a few people, Morgan included, as she had expected me to pettily fighting that claim. Really? Yes, I confirmed. Which is why I think a better punishment with these new details should be styled. You still committed atrocities, Morgan, and your status hardly spares you from that. Her jaw dropped. But 100 years of community service as a church's assistant will be affordable, I suppose. Why, I can tell Felicianus will be more than happy to be convincing a new Mary Magdalene to become a believer of our Lord and Savior, I said before turning to someone that had already understood what I was up to and was smiling eye to eye about it. In fact, I suppose it wouldn't be too troublesome of a burden to teach poor Morgan how that works, scathack. I don't wish to overburden you after all. The former queen grinned the kind of chilling grin that was quick to send shivers down the white-haired former witch. I wouldn't mind at all. And thus another plan of Morgan was sent down the bin for the time being. She did get a minor victory as she was no longer so dangerous to require enforced imprisonment, but I wasn't going to literally give her freedom just like that. Better person or not, there were still crimes she had to answer for, and what I gave her was mercy. Mercy was not stupid trust. Just as much as ruthlessness was a necessity all the time with troublesome individuals like her. She was right, I could easily fall into the trap of becoming a new Uther if I wasn't wary about it, but I was learning how to be a good king, and I wasn't going to let my personal views to taint how a king had to be somewhat more careful with their own judgment. One thing was to enforce willpower, another was finding a just punishment by respecting my own authority and the autonomy of my subjects. And with both tedious tasks set down for the time being, I was back to my office, digging through the paperwork and smiling a bit as, within the documents, I found some positive reports about a side project that was soon going to become a reality. A massive and fast type of ship which was meant to house dozens of people, numerous construction tools and resources, food, and allow shelter from storms. It was quite unsuited for combat, but that wasn't its main purpose, as this was going to be the first model of many colony ships. With Europe finalizing as a stable force for me to keep an eye on as a vigilant monarch, what was left for Britannia to do was to find new lands to occupy, new people to acquire as new subjects, and maybe new cultures to greet and accept in this grand empire. It was time to look west and colonize the right way. Bringing civilization, medicines, and new ways of life to the natives in exchange of a new flag to nod at and new pride of being part of a bigger and multicultural community. Yes, I finally did it. I conquered you, Joseph. Morgan cackled crazily, hands thrown in the air as she laughed madly at the ceiling as she was sitting on my lap. Boobs jumping up and down and wet pussy allowing my cock in and out of her naughty hole. Not the first time this happened, but never a habit I really picked up positively considering I was quite asleep during those occasions. And Morgan was known to be shy when asking for kinky shit like that, dropping the formality of asking for the sake of just using my state of slumber to get the fun started. Creepy? Yes. But was I opposed to this? I may have started this trend by mentioning it to her in a flirty manner. I just hadn't expected for Morgan to just take this as an option. There was a lot to say about this moment, especially since I just woke up with Maya giggling and having a camera on to record the sight. Then again, my dear wife did tell me that Morgan would have eventually caught up with her mind on this occurrence. I just didn't expect it to take about 1,000 years and a half for this to happen. Things have changed a lot in this long break into talking about my life, but I have to say that I had my reasons to be distracted. Starting with my ambitions for the Americas and also handling personal and international businesses, finding time to write down things in my journal became nigh impossible. The colonization of the eastern coast, the integration of natives, the rapid diffusion of medicines to alleviate the wave of sickness coming from the old world into the new world and, well, exterminating those tribes that tried to wage war against our expansion for silly reasons, the conquering of New Britannia, took a lot of resources and numerous decades to achieve, but the end result was a favorable option for everyone. Those natives that were peaceful towards our arrival still had their tribes settled in their own lands, recognized as autonomous regions which bowed their head to the Central Britannian Authority and yet enjoyed special rights within their territories. Proper civilization in the form of cultural exchanges, resources, fashion, and even medical advances were enough to settle these lands and acquire their permanent friendship. They recognized Britannian supremacy, but were keen to preserve their unique traditions to some extent. With the Americas taking a while to conquer, Europe became the next focus for the time eventually approached me to solve the heir situation, and there had been some temptation to personally help her in that regard. Yet, after listening to a few points raised by Maya, I ultimately decided to not get that sort of plan to go through. I suggested Valia to a few candidates from my knights and she eventually picked Agravain. I wasn't sure what the woman saw in that guy, but, much to my surprise, the usually cynical knight and administrator looked quite happier compared to his previous roles. And yes, I know, why not broaden the harem some more? The option was there, but that didn't mean it was without ramifications to keep an eye on. I wanted a big family, but I wasn't looking forward to making it Habsburgian through some unseen ties between family members. It was easy to keep the current list of kids from getting too close with one another and, yeah, that's all in that regard. Speaking of keeping an eye on multiple issues at once, the Eastern Roman Empire struggled a fair bit to accept the rise of this Roman Federation, yet its effort to keep a centralized rule started to lose legitimacy while dynasties started to fight to obtain the emperorship. Around 800 AD, what would have become Byzantium fragmented under the rivalries of various ethnic groups in the country, and some of the nations that came out of it accepted integration within the Roman Federation. The Pope at the time would visit Constantinople to host a mass in 857, mending the relationship of the two Romes due to the previous clashes between Latin and Greek rites. Islam didn't gain the same momentum as in the original timeline as Arabia solidified within a singular country led by Christian and Coptic Arabs, with the capital being Mecca. That didn't mean the end of the religion, but it turned into a less expensive one as it would have been. Some traditions persisted and they were recognized as a brethren religion by the Pope together with the Jewish group. Mosques existed, but most of the warlord-era rulings had long been removed from the Quran. The proto-modern nations started to ultimately change into proper modern ones by following my example. The United Kingdom of Iberia came to be from the Suebi decentralizing and allowing other cultures to obtain rights within their kingdoms. Gallia peacefully shifted in a non-feudatory system. Italy was shaped into a pseudo-Roman republic that was still captained by the Pope, and the Frankish king became Germania. Clovis had not been a very ambitious man, but his kids proved to be quite precocious in expanding the lands they inherited from their father. At first, there was a genuine fear that the division of lands and the severe decentralization of the Franks would have led to a bloody civil war. But what many didn't expect to see was for the many Frankish kings to ally and cleverly split the lands of modern-day Germany among each other. The process was tedious, with the brothers squabbling over who was to take what, but the end result was still enough to set them in a strange path that finished with a single king in charge of a federalized country. And one that was fairly powerful but, nowadays, also quite peaceful in nature. It had much to do with the fact that, through their expansion campaigns, Christianity spread far and wide, with its more tame outlook acquiring a few unexpected allies in the East. Also, dear, shouldn't you be, getting ready? I pointed out, gaining a questioning look from my lovely wife. After all, a certain girl from the Japanese entourage visiting today may be upset to know her mommy is not ready to welcome her. In fact, what really took the cake unfolded in Asia, specifically in Japan. I could still remember the moment with fondness as it was one of those times Maya's stubbornness battled and crushed the will of an entire army for the sake of a single individual that she grew to consider a surrogate child of ours. It was around the early decades of the 12th century, and we were enjoying our first royal visit in Japan. Everything was nice and pleasant due to how Emperor Sutoku wished to treat us as honorable guests and fellow children of heaven, but that nicety came to an end when Maya caught notice of a peculiar event unfolding in the fields of Nasu. For 3 days, Maya stood by the side of a frightened girl that was 500 years younger than her, the woman's magical prowess shown to its purest form as arrows couldn't pierce her barriers. It took me a day to realize my dear wife hadn't gone to check on her own someplace in Osaka and that had gone to Tajichi to help with the matter. It also took me a day to beat my way through the mighty army hosted by the once Emperor Toba. The man was outrageously infuriating and I took a degree of delight in smacking him around for what he was doing. His grief, his anger towards the one he came to know Tamamonome, all of that became the last feeling he felt as he was felled by my blade while trying to attack me with a naginata. What ensued was a bit foggy to me due to how intense the remainder of the week was. Tamamo stayed with us within our guest rooms, quietly trying to make sense of the situation while also many times sending letters to Emperor Sutoku for forgiveness and coming many times close to end her life out of guilt. It took a massive effort to not cause a war, but we convinced the Emperor to let Tamamo leave for the time being. The fox girl was surprised by how many people just praised her arrival and decades-long stay, eventually making it back home during Emperor Rokujo's reign. Her experience made her a valuable advisor for the imperial court, but also made her a target of the ensuing shogunate. Things would change for good when she was granted by the Emperor Gonara the duty of securing the heavenly realm during the Sengoku period. 5 years later, Japan was unified under imperial guidance, thus Tamamo's sins were forgiven and her name restored as a blissful connection to Amaterasu. From then on she was the main diplomat for Britannian-Japanese circumstances, but also a valuable element of modern-day Japan's integration within the Western society. Which brought us back to this very point. Wait, that means little Tamamo is visiting. Maya beamed, current task forsaken as she picked her clothes, rushed to the bathroom and surely planned to intercept a certain fox girl that the woman had grown to see as a daughter of ours. Morgan smiled cunningly, a most devious plan being concocted within the depths of her mind now that the last obstacle to secure me as hers only end. Also, Ria and Gwen will come by too for our weekly day together. Morgan thus deflated and fell on my now empty side, cum pouring from her womb while she struggling to accept that her sister was soon going to visit. Ria was, well, the biggest change of them all. Her pregnancy came through as a surprise for many and her court was sworn into secrecy when she revealed to them what her real biology was. None of her loyal courtiers revealed the truth, having spent years getting her court cleansed from potential troublemakers. Still, it was around 490 that she ultimately revealed the truth to the world. Our kingdoms had grown close enough that many of the laws still being used by both realms were the same and it felt easy to confuse the capital between Londinium and Camelot. In the end, Ria came out with her real gender when her forms became too difficult to hide away. Her armor couldn't be changed anymore as her body had fully shaped up bountifully and no one could believe their king was a woman. But still a king. And a king that already harbored a relationship with her brother-in-arms. It was shocking, but even more was stunning the response from the Pope, confirming Felix III as a proper mad lad. I knew it. He literally wrote a letter with just these words, and a smaller note congratulating for this situation since he found this ordeal, albeit unusual, quite amusing and fitting with the Lord's way of setting up a kingdom of love and understanding. Britannia thus absorbed Camelot, with Rhea accepting the title of king consort, while Guinevere was, well, happy to be queen consort herself. The marriage mess was, as one would expect, a mess. But it somehow worked due to numerous long-term factors which favored our revelation. Polygamy for our situation was justified within that we are immortals and divinely blessed excuse, which worked nicely within internal and external affairs. Still, it also opened a few can of worms in the form of, well, attempts of some women to try and get in for the fun. Tamamo herself was, to a degree, involved in this too, with Maya being keen to coach her brave vixen into claiming the ultimate pot of cookies that was me. Many times I saw the fox girl in the nude and I could tell she was a hottie through and through, especially since her connection with Amaterasu made her a divinely gorgeous entity with those big tits and childbearing hips, but that wasn't a possibility since she really put an effort to call me daddy whenever I was around, and it sure made me feel uncomfortable considering Lyanna still calls me that. And the rejections sure did little to assuage that whole insanity, and time has gone by. I just learned to accept peace was not an option when it came to this sort of stuff, and men, Miss Lancelot. I hope his marriage is working well. Last time I heard of my trustworthy guard was when he announced Galahad was once more busy exploring Africa or something like that. The boy had always been an explorer to heart, and a good part of the early books on global history were born through his extensive efforts. Just as I finished this thought process, Morgan and I turned to the door as someone kicked it open. This room, Arturia, now in her prime physical state, proclaimed with the most serious face and tone. Stinks of mud and heat. The blonde was wearing a brown jacket over her honey yellow blouse, a pair of skin-tight dark blue jeans and a pair of brown boots. She looked quite fine in that fashion combo, and right now, her smugness against Morgan elicited some condemnation from her older sister. Curse you, sister. I am the one that claimed Joseph. Rhea sighed. We have been here before, I did it already with him, and that's not a big boast to make after centuries of doing the same thing, Morgan. The former witch scowled, but then tried to save face by pushing forth with her villainous monologue. Joke's on you, sister. I shall still have a child from Joseph and Dash. You already have Joshua and Morgause, I commented flatly. Yes, you old bat, you already have kids. I have kids with him, so that's no ground to appear superior to any of us, the blonde cemented. Just let me have it for once, damn it. Morgan exclaimed angrily, crying at how easily bullied she was. And this is how my life is now. I guess I couldn't ask for more. It's crazy, but fun. It's rough when it comes to paperwork, but family is around to make each day lovely. Yet, while everything was fine here, in a different quadrant of the Naciverse things were about to get spicy. Master, stop ogling at our opponent and give me a command. I shrieked annoyingly, dodging a couple of mana-based blasts thrown forth by a very annoying servant foe. The source of my grand frustrations was an individual that I, quite the frustrated servant that I was, couldn't help but feel familiar and somewhat disappointed with her current mental disposition. Her first reaction to my words was the blush that burned half her face, and her tiny hope twitched in embarrassment. It's not my fault this crazy war has so many nice-looking guys involved. I am just a maiden after all. Rhea Pendragon, my master, shrieked back in clear irritation. I could only grit my teeth at that response, struggling against Archer while her master, a young man with red hair and yellow eyes, also perplexed on what the hell was going on right now. There was only one thing certain as I felt the frustration melt before the familiarity and leave an odd amused smile on my face. This unusual timeline sure feels familiar for some reason.